Thank you. It's very interesting that I get a call to come talk about my youth in Springfield to relative strangers, although I know some folks here in the audience. Really great folks, a great part of Springfield. And I enjoy talking about Springfield, and I think over the 40 years following my father and my grandfather in the investment advisory business, I've met a lot of people, met a lot of real incredible people, done a lot of real incredible things here.
Hey, Chris, is that a mic you're wearing? Are you wearing a mic?
Yes, a mic.
Okay.
It's just for his.
It's not working.
Well, it's not helping us any.
No, he's gonna turn down the heat over there.
Okay.
I can come a little closer, I can talk louder.
I can stay closer. Okay, well, there's a couple geezers here like me, okay? Sorry, I want to be able to hear.
It's still that fan, he's turned it off.
Happy to. Well, you know, trying to figure out where to start and how to organize. There's so much happened. I was born in 1958 to Pat and Julie Noonan. If you knew them at all, my father was well known in town. He did an awful lot for this community and gave an awful lot to this community in so many ways, from being Sangamon County Board Chairman at one point in his career, even in financial advisory, and helping build the county building, finance, sell the old county building to the city. He was a master at some of these things. And I guess some of the other things that, going back to my grandfather, we're not in the hardware business. A lot of people know that about that family. Great folks, they're not related, but they do a great job of getting our name out there, so I thank them for that. But going back to how I described what our family's done, what I was around, is the easiest story is Dolman 1, Dolman 2, and Dolman 3. My grandfather was part of building Dolman 1. My father, Dolman 2, and then I did the financing when I was in Citigroup for Dolman 3. So we helped build Springfield. I did the financing for the new sewer plant north of the fairgrounds, and I've been involved in municipal finance, and now I can't do it because rules and regs have changed. But being part of building Springfield and seeing my family do it, like my grandfather started the Airport Authority. He was part of a group of guys, including, Lee Ensel, if you knew Lee, and they had this group that they met in the basement of what is now the Illinois Municipal League building at Capitol and Fifth, and the basement, right. They called it the Oso Peachy Club at first. It then became the Sangamon Club. So he was part of that. And then Noah Dixon, who was part of Mr. Matheny's partner, was Matheny Dixon. Then it became Dixon Bretcher Noonan when my grandfather joined it. And that was in the early 1900s. So I'm just setting this up for later. Right? Like a good storyteller would. So 1958, here I come. I don't remember anything in 58 or 59. I was 2. But it starts in the 60s, which were really an interesting period in the United States. Some of the effects of the 60s are still with us today. Women's issues, civil rights, what happened in Vietnam, what happened in Nixon administration into the 70s. I got to live through that. Kent State, I had an older brother and 2 younger brothers. So I was never at a loss for something to do with somebody. But also, in the 60s, my neighborhood is a block away from Christ the King School. And back then, it was a predominantly Catholic neighborhood. I knew this because having 4 boys, we were like the smallest family within our half-mile radius. So there was a Hagley, a Dr. Hagley, I think there were 8 of them. The Martys, Dr. Marty, there was 11 Marty kids. The Cadwells had 13. The Tykes had 8. I mean, if you couldn't find somebody to play with in 1966 in the west side of town, something wrong with you. It was absolutely a great time to grow up in America and in Springfield, Illinois. Our bicycle was our freedom. We could go anywhere, and we did. So, I mean, we couldn't go past Chatham Road, and then as we got older, we could go to MacArthur, and then one day John Sankey and Craig Campbell and I drove all the way out to the lake. We thought we'd gone to California. So we're free. But going back, through all these different compartmentalization pieces of life in Springfield, I used to walk to school through snow and all that stuff, like I tell my kids now. Vachel Lindsay School is now the Leland Grove Police Station. But that's where I went to grade school. I walked, around over to Chatham Road, which Chatham Road was just an oil and chip road. If some of you are a little older than I am, you remember that road. It was hillier. went by a line golf course, much hillier, a little farm road, and they widened it. I got to see that. So I walked to Ben Franklin. No, I walked to Rachel Lindsay. I got to ride my bike to Ben Franklin, where I then met a lot of other kids. And then I got to drive to Springfield High School. So, you know, all the phases of life and mobility, walking, biking, cars. And then, of course, I drove to college, and the rest is history. We all grow up and become who we are. But the things that really changed my life in Springfield was the fact that I had parents that encouraged us to be ourselves. And when I say that, my dad was a Navy captain. He went to Yale. My mom felt like, you know, back somewhere in her life, she was English royalty. So when Downton Abbey came out, she lived that life within her house. She had that properness, and we all learned proper etiquette. You know, she would croissant, you know, she would correct our English. We learned how to set tables. We opened doors. We did all those things. So my mother refined my brothers, and I don't know how she did it, but she did it. So we came from that area where we learned proper English. We learned our manners until we got out of sight. And then we became kids again. But it was the things that happened. My older brother also went to Yale, and then he went to Harvard. So he got some of those genes. And I had to follow Patrick at Springfield High School. And you know, the thing is, you know, I didn't realize this was going to happen until some of the teachers that were his favorite teachers would say, David Abbott would say, "Oh, you're Pat's brother." I'm like, oh. Hey, let's establish this right now. I am the classic underachiever. I am not going to have a 33 or whatever on my ACT like my brother did. But I'll be fun. I'm the fun brother, okay? And I had a lot of fun growing up because, again, on the west side of Springfield in 1966 or whatever it was, 8 years old, everything was possible. But the first two events that I remember, think about early 60s. Well, my parents were devastated, just like the nation was when JFK was assassinated. That I clearly remember. I was only 5. And the greatest thing that ever happened in my lifetime, the Beatles. The Beatles changed everything for me. They did. That's when I knew at 5 years old I was going to play the drums. And I've played the drums ever since. I am now a Yamaha endorsing artist and a master drummer. And I play all over the country. So I've got that going for me. But I learned that early on. That was something that happened to me with that music. My grandfather on my mom's side, what's his name? Robert Sutton. They had the music store here in town, and they had Suttons. So he was a jazz drummer, so I have that. And then his grandfather was a drummer in a corps in the Civil War. So my brother got the Yale education, and I play drums. That's fair, but I don't mind. I got drums. And drums are way cooler. You can use it every day. So I did that. And then, do you remember the show before cable? There's 3 channels. We had all that, right? 3 channels. You had to actually get up, change the channel. Oh my God, the humanity, right? Oh, my kids look at me and go, really? And the dial phone, and we had a teen line with a little switch and all that cool stuff. But it was the wide world of sports. Anybody recall that?
Sure.
The little victory and the agony of defeat, that poor guy on the ski jump. This changed my life as well. During that show, at the beginning and at the end, they always showed particular athletes doing extraordinary things. Pele. I loved him. So since then, my life has been soccer. I was one of the first captains at Springfield High when we started the program. I played in college on the Final Four team. We ranked #1 in the nation. I went to go play professionally in Phoenix, Arizona. I've coached for 40 years. My kids have all played. I'm 1-1 in state championships with my boys. I one boy won a state championship. One was runner-up. They both went to Loras College up in Iowa. We're on 2 Final Four teams. And soccer's been a huge part of my life. It came from the 60s. It came from that TV show. It came from Pele. Just like Ringo Starr and the Beatles took me. It's amazing what happens in your youth, especially then, because we weren't bombarded today with so much media. It's almost over. I have 5 children, so I know about this stuff. And they range from my youngest is 19 and my oldest is 35. So trying to bring up this group of kids in the era where they didn't have phones, and then they had phones, and then they could text, and then they have the smartphones, and then they have social media. It's some wicked stuff and it's some good stuff, but can you imagine having that stuff when you were like 10? access to literally any and everything. That's probably a blessing. And what I really liked about that time period was that you had to use your imagination and you had to be resourceful. I was never inside the house. You know, it's been a summer day or after school, I mean, you change your clothes and boom, out that door you go. I'd be on my bike, I'd be going up to Christ the King, because everybody was on their bike and they're hanging around out there. What are we gonna do? You know, they're the kids that were gonna go throw mud balls at cars on Chatham Road. They're the kids that were gonna put up a baseball game. We could play up there. We're gonna go play kick the can, ghost in the graveyard, capture the flag, every single night, every summer long. I started out playing Little League baseball up there, but there wasn't enough action in it for me. That's what soccer took over. But to see a summer night, before they built the big church that looks like the volcano, there were ball fields up there. Okay, those were all baseball fields. And so I played Little League up there. Summer night, dusk. The snow cone truck's ringing that bell. You hear Mr. Softy truck. And kids and families fill that whole parking lot. All 3 ball fields are going. Kids are on their bikes, hanging on the backstop, having a snow cone. I mean, that's about as perfect as it gets, you know. So I look at stuff today and, you know, it's, kids' sports have taken on a totally different level. I mean, the team I coached was a very elite team. We played nationally across the country. We were flying to games. I know. What kid did that in the 60s? We'd fly to Dallas to play in the Dallas Cup. Or we go to Memphis, or we go to Nashville, or we go to Las Vegas. And that's different. But what we didn't do back then, you know, my dad, who did so much, as I mentioned, I didn't see him a lot in the evenings. He was on every committee, every board, blah, blah, blah. So my mom was around a lot. With traveling sports, I spent so much time with my boys. My daughters kind of missed out, and that's unfortunate because they didn't play. I tried to get them to play. But you can lead a horse to water. But I spent so much time with my 3 boys at various levels traveling. You learn more about your kids in the car than you do any place else. And driving 3 hours to Chicago with the boys, or one of the boys, or they and their teammates. It was just a connectivity. But the other thing is, what I found out is, very much like Springfield, the connectivity here is pretty terrific. You know, there's a couple people in here that I know, and they know people that I know, and then we're related somehow, and it's just, it's an amazing community. And you know, what Harvey and Judy Stevens have done here in the community, you know, again, it takes people like that to do what they've done with Community Foundation, with Harvey's law firm, and the accomplishments, but everybody seems to just care. So, again, going back to the 60s, I'm not finished with the 60s because there's so much to cover there. My older brother, he's 3 years older, he was a pretty smart dude, right? And he was very intuitive and he read everything. I was outside playing baseball. He was up at his desk reading, you know, the Tolkien. You know, he had erector sets. He was building guitar amplifiers. I was chasing girls down the street. He was focused so much on this stuff. So I would ask him, how do you know, and if I ever had a problem happening, you know, so I had this great resource, and he had older friends, right? So one of the greatest things about being in the 60s with an older brother who was also a very good musician were the friends of his that were musicians. Dr. Singleton's son, Jamie. Charlie and Mary Toberman's son, Charles. Charles went to Berkeley. Charles is now, he's been teaching in a conservatory in France for the last 25, 30 years. His daughter just graduated from Middle Tennessee State in violin. My brother, Patrick, Chuck, and Jim have just put two more albums out together. I played with those guys. I mean, those are the guys I was playing with. Jim Singleton playing bass. He ended up going to North Texas State University, which they now call University of North Texas. I went there a year because of Jim. It's the best music school in the United States, by far, over Berkeley. He ended up playing with Woody Herman right out of school. Boom. Every cat out in NTSU ends up playing with somebody. Any band you see on TV, those horn players, I guarantee you they're Berkeley or North Texas State. The guys in the pit at the Oscars, North Texas and Berkeley. You know, the Jimmy Fallon show, the Tonight Show, all those guys are really school-trained musicians. I had that luxury. So I grew up playing with these guys and really seriously was in a garage band. And that's what I also remember. We played at my house at 2036 Greenbrier on the corner of Greenbrier and Celtic. And it was one of those great days where we're going to practice in the garage today. We have some new music we're going to lay on the neighborhood. You know, we set up in the garage, we play a little bit, and then my brother would go over, he'd open the garage door just a little bit. We'd play a little bit more. We'd open that garage door up a little bit. We could see a couple of bikes out in the street, you know, and then we'd open up some more. Pretty soon there were like about 20 kids out there on their bikes, and word was getting around the neighborhood. Pretty soon we had a crowd in the street. And then the Leland Grove police would show up. And we'd take everything outside. But it was fun. I mean, garage bands were a thing. And I got to do that with these older guys who all become incredibly gifted musicians. So I had that luxury of playing. And they turned me on to some really incredible stuff that the artists today, they consider, there's a band called Yes. And they put out an album that they call, you know, it's one of the greatest progressive rock albums of all time, called Close to the Edge. I never would have heard that without my older brother and his friends. So I had my older brothers turn me on to all this music, which propelled, you know, the way I was learning to play and grow. And all these really smart kids at Springfield High at the time. One of which you probably know today, his name's Andy Van Meter. He's county board chairman. He and I went to kindergarten, he was valedictorian in my high school class. So I figured I got covered there too. Andy was right? I was the muscle, Andy was the brains. Great guy, he's doing an outstanding job. He's just a Princeton guy. But I also met another titan of industry, Jeff Isernham. If you know his name, something about cars. And, Pat Kelly, who's a judge here, Eric Hoagland, Family Video, family. I was surrounded by people who built, you know, so many things. I got to know so many great people. Charlie and Kay Hoagland. And Charlie went to Yale with my dad. And so, you know, we knew that. Eric was one of my buddies for a long time growing up. I got to learn a lot about that business. It's very interesting, even what they're doing today. And had to live through the tragedy they went through in the 60s with the fire up in Michigan. We all knew about that too. Spent every summer at Illini Country Club. I was somewhat fortunate, you know, whatever you call that, privilege. But it was a great place to grow up. It kept me out of trouble. I knew every kid that was there. Spent every day in the pool together. We grew up together, and it was a safe place to grow up. Washington Park, played tennis. Some of you might know my cousin Steve Patton. He's a tremendous tennis player. Jeff Wilday, you know the Wildays. Jeff and Steve were tennis players at Springfield High, and they kicked my butt up and down that court, and I learned a lot from that. Great people. You know, but again, with my brother being, you know, really smart, really aware, and later in the 60s, I was really into the music. It was a big part of our lives. And so you started to see this change in the country, and you could feel the change coming as young people, right? Being very, very impressionable with the Vietnam War, and a lot of the music started to reflect that sentiment, the anti-war sentiment. Everybody from Crosby, Stills and Nash to Santana, Led Zeppelin, The Who, all these bands that are still regarded as some of the great, and they still play out today. The music sort of changed, and then we had Woodstock that we all wanted to attend, but obviously we didn't know about it because there was no internet. We heard about it later. Woodstock, and then of course you had Kent State and the Vietnam War protests. And I remember clearly, I was standing on the corner of Adamson and Fifth out in front of the First National Bank building at the time, and there was a protest downtown. I saw my brother walk by. He was in this Vietnam War protest. I'm like, I'm in. And so I was probably 12, 13. I think my brother's against it. I'm going to be against it too. But we had discussions. You know, my dad, my brother, they didn't see eye to eye. My brothers, well, let's put it this way, he became a college professor. So his views were different than my dad's. And it was great because the debates were good. They talked about all the issues, and we learned how to do that at an early age. It was respectful. My brother Pat always tried to win, and that was just not going to happen until he got older. Then it was really tough because he was Yale School of Management, Harvard PhD, board of the Harvard Business School, taught at Harvard Business School, spent 20-some years at Emory, and Roberto was way to School of Business, and he just retired 5 years ago. And he was married to former Mayor Nelson Howard's daughter, Jo, who unfortunately passed away from a cardiac arrest at age 58, a month after my brother retired. So we had to deal with that. And again, knowing Nelson Howard, if any of you ever knew Nelson, he was a dynamic guy. But having him over for family events, and he was gregarious. So, you know, it's interesting. In a town this size, you get to meet the people and grow with the people who made this town and changed this town, and are continuing to do it today. In Boston or in Chicago, it's the luck of the draw if you get close to people who have their names on the doors of all the businesses. In Springfield, you can meet these people, you grow up with these people, you go to church with these people, or you coach their kids or whomever. It's, you know, it's to a point, and I think some of you know this, if you need something in this town, you can probably pick up the phone and get it done. Well, you know, I've got to that point in my career, I kind of say, I know everybody. It's my town now, right? Harvey knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's, you get to a point in this town, you know everybody. I can call Jim Langfelder, or I can call Andy, or I can call whomever, because you've been here long enough, and your name's in the paper for the right reasons. And you know, again, learning a lot from the people I grew up with, my brothers in the 60s. The music was important, the sports were important. Seeing the community change, you know, you were all here. Chatham Road changed, you know, Town and Country Shopping Center, look at it today. It was a magical place in 1967 or 8, whatever. I was at Ben Franklin. Then after school, we'd cut through the fence and go over to Walgreens over there, and we'd hang out, you know, because that's where, you know, we'd walk across MacArthur to go to Dairy Queen. And then I would tell my mom, you know, we'd do ice cream after school, God forbid. You know, but that's where girls were, so that's that era. And then the bowling alley was there, and Woolco, and you know, the Paul Schombacher and I grew up together, the Schombacher family. And not to get Paul in trouble or anything, but Paul was a master at certain aspects of life, let's say. And I mentioned to you, I had a bad experience with wine in high school. It was, and I don't drink wine to this day. And I probably would like it, my wife loves it. But Paul was a master at certain things, as I may say. It's being filmed, so I'm not going to say exactly what he was a master at. But my friend Craig Campbell and I were able to, how do we say that? We attained IDs that showed our age slightly different. And at the time, the drinking age was 19. Okay, so at 15, in certain places in town, they'd go, okay, right? And some of those places are still here today. Oscar's Packaged Liquor on 11th Street is where we went. We went to Oscar's on 11th, and they would give us $6. They would get out of here, kid. That's where we'd go. Louis Spiegel would drive, and we would go get it. But we got fake IDs, and we rode our bikes to Walgreens and got bottles of Boone's Farm. And then we hid them in the bushes over in Washington Park, and then that night we went over and we drank it real fast to go to this party. There ended the lesson, right? Right? So those are the things you learn, and everybody's been through it. You know, Springfield High was magical. We had great teachers. Phyllis Kutrikon was my 3rd grade teacher. Anybody know her? Phyllis? And see, Frank Stern's wife, what was her name? Her name was Davis. She was my teacher. But I had, you know, these, you know, Phyllis Kutrikon, you never forget. Cliff Tozer, Albie Plain. Albie was my guidance counselor at Springfield High. His son Hank was a classmate of mine. But Cliff Tozer and Albie Plain in the 60s had the TP day camp, the Tozer Plain day camp. Anybody attend TP day camp here?
I did.
Marriott? I bet you did. You lived out that way.
Yeah, I was
Do you know exactly where that was? I can't for the life of me.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I go by all the time.
Really?
Yeah, it's a residence now.
They had these sort of pinkish orange buses, little weird buses, remember that? It said TP day camp on it. My older brother started going, and we would be out in the front yard, and they'd pick him up, and then when the bus went down the street, my brothers and I would chase him. Well, I guess we're just little kids. And then I got to go. And then there was Pete and Tom chasing the bus. So it was, you know, the TP day camp, and that was pretty neat because they get us out of my mom's hair. Can you imagine it? You know, you have 4 boys under the age of like 9, 8. You know, again, my mom's, you know, sainted in somebody's heaven. And you know, we had varying degrees of wildness. You had the smart one, and you had the fun one, and you had Pete was kind of smart and wild, and Tom was really wild. So we were pretty well, all in all, if you average it out, and my mom did a fabulous job. But again, west side of Springfield, pretty bucolic. You really couldn't get in a lot of trouble over there. There wasn't a lot going on, and geographically, we were kind of isolated, right? You didn't have the internet. We had 3 channels. You know, we weren't on the phone all the time. I was playing with my brothers. I built model cars, model battleships, because my dad was Navy, aircraft carriers, and I started building bigger cars, 1/16 scale, and according to Aurora, I became a master modeler. You had to build 150 models and take pictures and send them in. And that was a skill we were all proud of when we were younger. And then I think one of my first career ideas was to be a herpetologist. Anybody know what that is? Study of reptile and amphibians, because that's what Eric Hoagland and I did.
Yes.
We would go down to the creek on Outer Park Drive, and my footprints could still be on the bottom of that thing. I spent so much time up and down that creek. And again, it's changed dramatically out there with development. There was a lot of undeveloped areas, a lot of snakes, all kinds of snakes. Stuff that would make you a little nervous now. Big ones. And we caught turtles, we caught a couple brown skinks, lizards. Eric now has an alligator, had an alligator. He took it to a different level. I ended up stopping at a certain point in life, realizing that herpetology is not as cool as I thought it was. But, we caught everything. We had cages in the garage. My mother was like, "Oh, Chris, not another one." So it was another snake or a lizard or So we caught them. My brother Pat helped us. We had what was it? A bull snake. What a bull snake is? It's black, yellow, and white, and they're huge. We found that off on Cokie Mill. It's this big, right? It was a big snake. And then we caught a hognose snake, which has the nose pushed up. And we saw Massasauga, which is one of the only venomous snakes in Illinois, aside from the copperhead. But, so I was into that kind of stuff. So when you're young, in the 60s, and you don't have the internet and the phone, and you're outside, and kids learn how to play, and they knew how to play. Everybody, all of you included, you were not bombarded with media 24/7. Politics were far from our mind. You don't see it 24/7. It's like a football game anymore. And the music was great. And so, relatively peaceful upbringing. No problems, no arrests, no problems like that. Grow up in a good family. The 70s, if you want to hear about the 70s, I can rip on the 70s for a while. But no, it was great. Springfield High School, I graduated in class of 76. It was the era of my brother Patrick. That group is a big bubble of kids in town. And so we went to split shifts. You remember the split shifts?
Oh, yeah.
My brother went in the morning, I went in the afternoon. I hated that. Silver lining was, I was the only one home in the morning with my mom. And I really, for 2 years, she and I would get up and talk, have breakfast, I'd sit and do homework. I'd go down and build and work on one of my moms listening to Yes, and I remember that distinctly. But she and I got in a groove, and I'd go to school about noon, and I'd come home about 6. When you leave at noon, come home at 6 in November through February, it's dark. You can't go out and do the things you normally do after school. So it was a real turned up time. And then by my junior year, I was able to go at 10:30, go at 3:30, because I was practicing soccer. That got me out. I'll do anything to get out of that last hour of class. I don't care what it is. But I did it. And but Springfield High was a great place. There were some great graduates at the time. I got to play sports and stuff with a guy named Harold McMath. And Harold McMath was on the Springfield High School basketball team. And knowing Mac at that time, he was a great 6'5", maybe power forward or center at that time. And he was just a great guy. Mac went to Bradley. Okay, my daughter's a freshman at Bradley right now, and Max and Harold's claim to fame was, at that time, I think they might still be in the same conference, was Indiana State and Terre Haute. It's the same time Larry Bird was playing for Indiana State. So Mac had to guard Larry Bird. Mac held him to 5 points. One game only. One game only. That's all you have to do. You held him to 5 points. And of course, the next game, he just lit him up. But it's kind of neat to know somebody you grew up with, got to play against him, did really well against the great Larry Bird, who was arguably one of the greatest players ever. Another friend of mine, Steve Meyer, not the Steve Meyer, the real estate fan, a different Steve Meyer, ended up going to Indiana to play soccer. He was 2 years younger than me, and great. It's great to see other people that you grew up with have great success. But here's the thing, a lot of them don't come back, right? I didn't think I'd be back here. I was at North Texas State, I met all these guys, and I came back up, unfortunately, to McMurray, which had one of the greatest soccer programs of Division I, II, or III in the country in the 70s, and it was a great school. and it went out of business 2 years ago. Pandemic just killed them. But I went there, they recruited me, I was going to go to, let's check this out, University of Tampa, Clemson, University of Utah, and I ended up thinking, play soccer. Well, they went to the Final Four in 1974, and I had a girlfriend at the time. I wanted to kind of stay close, and so Iden Gimelson, if you remember that name, he was my mentor. Iden just took me all the way and said, Chris, you should go to McMurray, go play at McMurray. They got a good squad, they'll be good for you. Okay, and I did, and you know, my freshman year we were in the Final Four, and it was the most exciting thing I've ever been involved in my life. Cold November day, they put the fence up around the field, and our field was right in the middle of campus, and it was a big 120 by 75 yard field, as big as you can have it. And we were playing Wheaton College, and they were always very good. They had 2 players on that team who ended up going to Chicago Sting, and it was Brett Hall and Steve Long. They were great, and they were our arch rival. And back then the tournament was only 16 teams, so you had to get a bid. You had to be based on your body of work. Sort of like the teams that get into the NCAA basketball tournament. If you don't win your conference, or if your conference isn't one of the big ones for the TV money, you have to get in there somehow. They look at your body of work. Well, we played a Division I program, which was great. Eastern, Northern, Western, University of Indiana, SIU Edwardsville at the time had won the NCAA tournament, Division I. We were playing these, Quincy College won the NAIA 8, 9 years in a row. So we had a very high level of play. It was the game to go to the Final Four. It was at home. It's a November day, winds blowing, a huge crowd, right? All of Jacksonville and our whole student body was there. And it was in sudden death overtime. Sudden death overtime. And one of my freshman classmates, who was All-American that year, Rich Mafuka from Rhodesia, buried this ball late in the game, and everybody came out in the field. It was just, you know, like you see in the movies. I got to do that. I was a little kid from Springfield. All my teammates were from around the country. I was the only one there from Springfield. They were all Chicago, New York, St. Louis, God, it was Rhodesia, England. I was from Springfield. I ended up doing well there. It was really a lot of good fun. So again, watching what happened here, even in the 60s with what Iden Gimelson did for the sport, put this town on the map. I mean, you can say a lot of things about soccer across the country, but I can give you stats of how many state titles we won, how many Division I players we've had, how many NCAA All-Americans we've had come out of Springfield, how many kids that have gone on in college that have been in NCAA title games, or captains like Chris Loftus, who walked on at Duke, ACC freshman, player, and captain, and took them to 2 Final Fours. I mean, their kids from this town can do anything. I think that's what you can take away from this is, I was able to understand that, for everything from Andy Van Meter, who's done great things, to someone like Hank Plain, who ended up, God, I don't know exactly. Do you know exactly what Hank has done? Have you heard about Hank Plain? He's bought and sold a couple companies that he's developed, medical device companies, and he sold one for $400 million. So I think that's pretty good for Springfield, and of course, the things that you remember, again, Watergate, Vietnam War, those were very impressionable things to me. But again, it was Springfield, and it felt really comfortable to be here. So after, leaving college, and I was going to go play music, but I thought, God, I'm having a really great run here in soccer. I went to play for the Phoenix Inferno in the Major Indoor Soccer League. I was on the practice squad, and I hurt a knee again. I just said, this is nuts. I didn't have any money. I was running out of money. I was throwing chicken and a fried baby, and I had like $100 in my account, which back then actually went a little farther than it does today. And I was in Phoenix, and at the time it was a quaint little town of about 850,000. You could actually get places pretty quickly. So it was a great experience, and my roommate was Tony Gazzardo. I don't know if anybody knows Tony. He's been a friend of mine since we were kids too. Tony and I were roommates, and if you know Tony, you know that we had a lot of fun. And we did, and it was a great experience, but something harkened back to, again, when I was at school in Texas, the same thing. I never got to experience fall, and that's my favorite time of year. For whatever reason, maybe it's sports, maybe it's because of that, just I quibble that to success on the field. I just like fall, and so not experiencing fall, Arizona was weird. At Christmas it was weird. Thanksgiving was weird. It just unbalances me as a Midwesterner, and You know, I could live a lot of places. I chose to come back, you know, and just say, what am I going to do? And I was thinking, well, I had banking experience because my senior year at Mac, I worked at the Elliott State Bank in Jacksonville, and my senior project and paper was all about, and I still have the paper, the future of electronic banking. And it's interesting to read it today because, you know, we were talking about it back then, and I talked about, you know, I postulated about everything going to a card. Not quite digital, because the aspect of digitalization wasn't reality back then, 1981, it was digital. But cards were a big deal, you know, magnetic strips and, you know, answer. So I was on the marketing team teaching people how to put a card in a machine and get money out of it. And imagine that, you know, people in that day were like, no, I don't trust these machines. Now they're people, that's all they do. You know, you look at the Marine Bank lobby in 1980 was a beehive of activity, right? And if you would have walked in the JP Morgan lobby any of the last 10 years, it's an echo chamber. So everything's changed, right? We got to see all of that. You know, then of course the 80s we saw digitization, and then, you know, working with computers. So I got to work on the easy answer, what they call that here locally, the easy answer system. And they weren't national. So it was all about how do we hook up to a nationwide system. So that was pretty neat. So my banking experience, I thought, would maybe give me a gig here at a local bank. And, you know, wasn't going to work. I don't know. Maybe I didn't dress the part, or maybe my hair was too long. I don't know, because my parents didn't let us have long hair. We were musicians and soccer players. And I'll have to tell you this, and I'll go on record to say my favorite tennis player. Can you imagine who that is? Borg. Borg. It's my guy. So we all want to look like Bjorn Borg, and that's why I think David Beckham got his look. Borg was the coolest cat in the 70s. So that was another great thing. Borg Connors, I mean, God. Borg McEnroe, Borg Agassi. It was just, we got to see all that great stuff. So I went to lunch with my cousin. He said, you got to come down and talk to us about what we do here. Okay. Steve took me to the Sango Club, and a couple hours later I thought, I really don't have any idea what this is about, but I'll give it a shot, you know. What they don't teach you in college is capital markets, you know, financial planning and investing and things like that. I had to learn it, you know, from my father and Steve, two of the best. And 40 years later, I know a little bit more than I did in 1982, but it's worked out okay. But it's been fun. Again, I can ramble on. I don't want to, but I like, you know, the fact that you seem to not be nodding off. You're like, a little bit. Just shut up. No, but thank you very much. I'm just making sure I got it. You know. Oh God, I didn't talk about disco. You got that? Vietnam got that. Woodstock, Frank got school, got Nixon. Oh, the oil embargo. We didn't talk about that. Kind of fitting today, isn't it? Did you have?
I have a local question.
Okay.
I didn't grow up here, but I've heard 3 or 4 different names for that waterway that you called Outer Park Creek.
Right, the creek. Yeah, the creek on Outer Park. I don't even know what it's called. South Branch. I don't know. What's the official name of that creek? I just called it my creek back then.
The creek.
You spent a lot of time in it.
There's an old map that I can't find again that calls it Bear Creek.
Okay.
Bear.
But I've mentioned that to people and they say, no, I've never heard that.
I was talking to my
It was Snake Creek for you, apparently.
a lot of things. But that creek used to be uncovered all the way into where, what they call Montvale now, the Montvale area. My brother Pete said, make sure you mention Kramer's Field. That was the Kramer farm, and I believe it was damaged by a tornado in the late 50s, early 60s. So the farmhouse was there, and it looked like something out of a movie, if I remember correctly. But they tore it down in the early 60s. But that's where we used to go and play. There were big, rutted gullies in there. So that was back when it was politically okay to play Army men. Of course, we would pow, pow, you know, and we'd be in these trenches, and World War II soldiers were our heroes, and, you know, so we played Army, or we played hide and seek, or we rode our bikes and we were jumping, you know, through the swales, and that's where I saw Earl Rowland's son have the motorcycle accident.
Ooh.
He was paralyzed from that motorcycle. That's exactly what happened. We were out there that day. So, I mean, That's part of Springfield history too, unfortunately, but that's where that happened, in Kramer's Field.
Didn't he have a person on the back? Bobby had something, wasn't there somebody on the back of his bike? Or no?
I didn't think so.
Okay.
A long time ago.
Yeah, that's my time, but I remember when it happened, but I just wondered about that, if that were true or not. He married Lynn
I
Chrysler.
can't recall.
Did you know the Chryslers?
No.
Mike and his wife fell off a boat and drowned.
Jeez.
While Bobby was on the boat, because he was disabled, so he couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, sorry.
That's right. But Kramer's Field was a big place, and that was wide open. Of course, Warson Road in Fox Meadows was the edge of town. And I guess it was in the late 60s they started to build Colony West. So I'd ride my bike there, and then that's where town ended. And all those hedgerows out there, those cornfields, you know, John and Rob Sankey, the Sankey family, and we would go out there, and again, John and I would hunt for snakes, and we'd have, you know, it was fun. I mean, what else are you gonna do? It kept us out of trouble. There were other kids along Outer Park Drive and Linear Road that got in a lot of trouble.
Kept the
Shot
girls
with-
away,
Huh?
too. Kept the girls away, those snakes. Oh.
We thought we were more like Marlon Perkins, like it was kind of like these guys are Marlon Perkins, snake tamers and wild animals, we weren't afraid of them. So my daughter, who's in St. Louis, she's not afraid of snakes either. So my first group of kids, I was a neighbor of Mr. Hart's in Panther Creek for 18 years. We lived on the same street, lived across the street, Mike and I knew Sun Avenue, lived in the neighborhood as well. But on that street behind there, you could find snakes. And my boys were like, oh no. My daughter's like, yes. Runs in the family, so that's one of her things that she has over her brothers. Like, you just grab it right behind the head of me, it's not going to do anything. She put her hand in there, grabbed that thing, and the rest of it, she wraps around her arm, and she's cool. So I live at the lake now. So as you know, it's probably a luxury for me. I get the snakes. On my bike. If my wife looks out the window when I'm down there, she knows what I'm doing.
What do you do with them after you catch them?
I just let her go.
Oh.
I like to see them.
Yeah,
I think snakes are beautiful. Especially, they're all different kinds out there, and some are big, and some are small. I leave the little ones alone. I want to catch the big ones. And it's hard. They're hard to catch. They're fast. If you corner them, they turn around. They want to go, you know. But it's something that you learn at a young age, and it just kind of reminds me of being young. That's all it is. And then summer jobs, right? Remember the Velvet Freeze? The Velvet Freeze on the corner of Ash and McCarthy. It's where then Baskin Robbins ended up there before it moved down to Laurel, right? So we would leave Illini when it was adult swim at 3 o'clock. We'd ride our bikes down to the Velvet Freeze, and there was this really tough woman that worked in there that really gave us a hard time if we got out of hand. She kept us out a couple times, and rightly so. We were little rambunctious. And then Penny Lane started right next door to them. So leaving Ben Franklin back then, when you were trying to be cool and you want to get some beads or some incense or something, or some cool posters, we'd walk up, go to Penny Lane, and then go next door. And then my first job, you know, was at Baskin Robbins. I wore the hat and everything. I made it look good. You know,
Any pictures?
no pictures. No pictures. But one of my neighbors, Joe Hagley, one of Dr. Hagley's son, and Craig Campbell and I worked at Baskin Robbins because those are one of the only places you could work at 15. Well, I wanted a job. I had to buy more drum heads and more drumsticks. And my dad's like, I was pounding on him for more equipment. The drums aren't cheap, and so I had to work for stuff. We learned that, you know, how I get a lot of gear for a good price from Yamaha. But back then, my dad had a bike. I had to pitch in, you know, so I worked. And then, of course, he taught me a very valuable lesson. So that year, I rode my bike, and I'd ride home at 10 o'clock at night with my little, remember the lights you had on bikes? The thing would go against the wheel and turn, and like those little generators I had. One of those kind of crazy technology, isn't it? Had one of those lights on my bike, so I'd ride home at night. Then I worked for Woodside Township Street Department. My dad wanted me to learn what I didn't want to do. Or maybe I did. Just figure it out, you know. It's like you do this, or you can do that. So I think they're still there today. On Highland Avenue, you know where Highland is? Mm-hmm. They used to be able to cut through over the, you know, Iles, you know, it used to, railroad tracks. The ditches on the sides are really deep. I did that. And here's something disgusting that we did back then, that you can't do today. I can't believe we were even doing it back then. The street commissioner would say the weeds are getting too tall, you know, throughout there. They would take a 55-gallon drum of fuel oil with a pump in it, and he'd stand in the back of the dump truck, and they'd drive real slow, and we'd just spray the weeds with fuel oil. Of course, it killed everything. That's why those ditches, even today, I don't think have anything growing in them. I don't think they'll ignite, but they're deep, sharp, and so I did that. Then I got what back then I would consider the dream job when I come home from school in the summers. Of course, coming home to Springfield from college was, this place was so fun in the summer. All my friends were back and everybody was there and stayed, wherever we'd all be, at the Barrelhead, or Pat Devine's little place on the corner of Chatham Road in Wabash, or better yet, we'd go to Bowers Opera House. Ooh, I know. We had to go home and get dressed up first because they had dress code. But we would do that, and again, that's where
What was that last?
disco, Bowers Opera House.
Oh,
The Bee Gees and all that music started happening in about '78, and it was great, you know. Back then I hated it. I appreciate it today. I was more into odd time signatures, but it was great. But I worked at the Illinois State Fairgrounds. Now, how could that be fun, you say? Well, I had a profession, so my dad helped procure this for me. I was in a department called Space Rental. They call me the spaceman. Okay, space rental is like the real estate agent for the fair. I worked with this wonderful woman named Norma Lake, and she'd been out there forever, and Norma was so much fun to work for. I'm this hotshot young college kid, and she's this older woman who was tough, and I loved her for it. I had a golf cart, cans of spray paint, and a measuring wheel, and maps. And I had to study that fairgrounds because we're Buck and Bum one every year, or Sutter Saltwater Taffy. If you go to the fairgrounds and you look at the sidewalks, you're going to see a little T here and there with a 10 or a 15 or a 20 on it. Now those marks aren't mine, but that's what I was doing back then. So when somebody came and said, I really want to have we're thinking about coming to the Illinois State Fair. I said, well, Norman, Chris, can you take them and show them what's available? Come on, jump in the cart, guys. And I take these guys around. So we got this nice 15-foot front here on Grandstand Avenue, where we can go over here, and we can go on, this avenue, and the main gate. You want to be the main gate? I don't know. Those numbers aren't like they used to be. I think gate 2 might be better for you. So I learned how to sell, but it was fun. Working for Norma. So again, I had my golf cart, my measuring wheel, spray paint, autonomy, all summer long. June I didn't do anything. July I was busy. August, I had 2 weeks of a flurry, and then bam, I was back in training for soccer. Had to go back to school. It was the greatest summer job. You got to meet everybody, and better yet, because I know I love music, I had an all-access badge. I could go anywhere on the fairgrounds. And I would tell my dad, Dad, I'm probably going to be out there all night tonight. And he'd go, okay, you're doing a great job, son. I had a van, so I played music. I stay in my van. But I don't care who was playing. I saw Dolly Parton. I go backstage. I had this badge, all-access badge. I would go in the grandstand, go downstairs. There was a tunnel underneath the track. I just walk on the tunnel, come up backstage. Hey, guys, just walk on through. Dolly Parton talking to somebody or whomever. And then in the 80s, it was American Business Club. I was former president of that in about '91. And of course, we ran the concessions at the grandstand, and you got to see everybody and be involved in that. So that was the extent of my hardcore community involvement, but I've done other things since then. In a personal note, the most important thing that I think we decided to do as a family, because we're all altruistic in a certain respect, and you want to give money to where you feel it's going to do something. And you get asked by all kinds of people to do all kinds of different things, and my mom and dad were good examples of, they spread it out quite a bit, but what can we do to really make a difference? And what really makes a difference to us? Well, at 4 years old, my son, who's now 20, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And that was like, holy jeez, how do we handle that? Well, we learned an awful lot. My wife is actually an expert now on everything about that. So we started, doing this Kiss a Pig thing and giving money to the American Diabetes Association. But what we found out is that it just really doesn't do anything locally. And they're more concerned about type 2, and that's fine. We're more concerned about type 1. But everybody is affected by cancer. everybody. And I got to know these people at SIU extremely well. And my parents started to donate heavily to the SIU Foundation. It all goes to cancer research here. So that's what we do. And that's, our names are on the wall in there, and they're going to continue to be on the wall in there. That's something I learned, you know, from just growing up here locally. And it's a great example that my parents started that. And that's just how I feel about it. I learned a lot about it. And the other great thing about being here, and this isn't so much about my childhood as it is now, is that we have one of the greatest medical communities in a town this size in the country. I couldn't be happier for our community. And after being in Texas, in Dallas, Fort Worth, and Phoenix, Arizona, why would you come back to Springfield? It's home, right? It's home. That's what it feels like to me. So I've been here, I've stayed here, I've raised 5 kids here, 2 of which now are at Merrill with me on my team. So they're 4th generation in business. I met my wife there over 30 years ago. She was my assistant. You know, funny how that happens, right? And so here we are 31 years later, 5 kids and 2 more in the business. And hopefully I get to a point where I can kind of slow down like my dad did. I had the luxury of 30, almost 40 years working with him. You know, I wouldn't trade it for the world. But you don't get to do that unless you're home. You don't get to do that unless you're in Springfield, Illinois. You know, and I'm just thankful I was born when I was born, and it was here with all of you in this town, and I wouldn't change a thing. Any questions?